A billionaire, devastated by the loss of his son, makes a weekly visit to the grave until he finds a little girl crying before the very same headstone. She claims to be the boy's sister and hands him a photograph that will change everything. From that moment on, a web of deadly secrets begins to unravel, and nothing will ever be the same. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this is going to be the best story you've ever heard. Saturday morning in New York City dawned with that typical grey autumn sky when the clouds seemed to carry the weight of all the city's untold stories. Edward Miller parked his discreet car at the entrance of Prospect Park, a sprawling green space in the heart of Brooklyn, far from the prying eyes his fortune inevitably attracted. There, among century-old trees and cobblestone paths, was a wooden bench facing a small man-made lake where ducks glided smoothly across the water. That was little Gabriel's favorite spot. His 5-year-old son loved feeding the ducks, running across the lawn, and collecting leaves of different shapes. It had been exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 17 days since Gabriel had disappeared. A full year of tireless searches, of investigations that led nowhere, of sleepless nights staring into the empty bedroom, waiting to hear that crystal-clear laugh that never returned. Edward walked slowly through the park, feeling the weight of every step. At 42, he looked as if he had aged decades. The man who once commanded business empires with a firm hand could now barely concentrate in meetings. His black hair was starting to grey at the temples, and deep, dark circles marked his face. He reached their usual bench, the one Gabriel used to climb on with his dinosaur sneakers to be at his father's eye level. He sat down slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile memories he still kept alive. He closed his eyes and tried to hear his son's voice, but time was cruel to memory. Sometimes he could no longer recall the exact tone of that childish voice saying, "I love you, Daddy," before bed. It was then that he heard a soft, stifled cry, the kind that comes from someone who has cried so much they no longer have the strength to make a sound. Edward opened his eyes and saw, sitting on the ground next to the bench, a girl of about 6. She wore a simple, faded blue dress, and her brown hair was in messy braids. In her hands, she held a crumpled drawing, wet with tears. The businessman's heart ached. There was something about the scene that transported him to another time, another pain. He cleared his throat gently so as not to startle her. "Hey, little one. Is everything okay?" The girl looked up, and for a moment, Edward was frozen. Those brown eyes, that expression of sadness mixed with hope, the way she wrinkled her nose as she tried to hold back tears, it was all so familiar, terrifyingly familiar. "I come here every day," the girl said in a trembling voice, "to be close to him." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Close to who, sweetie?" The girl pointed. "To the lake, to the ducks, to the lawn. To Gabriel, my best friend. He saved me." The world seemed to stop. His son's name, spoken by this unknown child, made Edward's legs feel weak. He knelt slowly, getting down to her level, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "How did you know, Gabriel?" His voice came out more choked up than he would have liked. The girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "We used to play here every day. I live nearby." She pointed vaguely in one direction. "At Miss Marlene's house. She lets me come here early in the morning. Gabriel was really nice to me. He said I didn't have to be afraid of anything because he would always protect me." Edward had to steady himself to keep from collapsing right there. "And when was the last time you saw him?" "The day he disappeared," the girl answered, her voice growing even quieter. "We were playing down there, near the trees. He told me a really important secret. He said he was going to tell his dad that night, but that I shouldn't be sad because soon we were going to be a real family." The words echoed in Edward's mind like distant thunder. What was the secret? The girl hesitated, looking at the crumpled drawing in her hands. Then, slowly, she held the paper out to Edward. It was a child's drawing made with colored pencils. 3 figures holding hands, a boy with dark hair, a smaller girl, and a woman. Underneath, in the crooked, uneven letters of a child learning to write, it said, "Daddy, this is my sister." Edward held the paper with trembling hands. The drawing was unmistakably his son's. He recognized that style, the way he drew people with oversized eyes and exaggerated smiles. But what did it mean? Sister? Gabriel didn't have any siblings, or did he? "Are you Gabriel's sister?" Edward asked, trying to process the impossible information he was receiving. "He said so," the girl replied. "He said he found out a secret about his mum, that I was his real sister, but nobody knew. He was so happy when he found out. He said he always wanted a sister." Edward's mind began racing. His ex-wife, Megan, their troubled marriage, the bitter separation 2 years before Gabriel's disappearance, the custody battles, the secrets, the lies. Could it be possible? Could she have hidden a pregnancy? A daughter? "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Sophia Carter." "Sophia, who's your mother?" The girl looked down. "My mum passed away when I was 4. She got really sick. My dad, he left me at the hospital and never came back. I've lived with different families since then. Now I'm with Miss Marlene, but she says she can't keep me forever." Edward felt a deep pain in his chest. This child had lost so much just like him, and now she was here holding a drawing by his son, claiming to be Gabriel's sister. He had to understand what was happening. "Sophia, do you remember your mother's full name?" "Julia Carter. She worked for a very rich lady. One time she took me to her job, and the house was huge with a pool and everything. The lady was kind of mean, but she had a little boy. I think it was Gabriel, but I didn't really know him back then." The pieces began to fit together in a disturbing way. Edward remembered that Megan had a personal assistant named Julia for a few years during their marriage. A quiet, efficient woman who had suddenly disappeared. Megan had said she'd quit to take care of personal matters. "Sophia, do you have anything that belonged to your mother? A picture, a document, anything?" The girl thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. "I have a picture. Miss Marlene saved it for me. It's the only picture I have of my mom. She's with me and a lady that Miss Marlene said was important." "Can you show me that picture?" Sophia nodded and pulled a small, worn photograph protected by a plastic sleeve from her dress pocket. She handed it to Edward carefully, as if it were a treasure. Edward looked at the photo and felt the ground disappear from under his feet. There was Julia, Megan's former assistant, holding a baby girl. Beside her, smiling, was Megan, his ex-wife. The date on the back of the photo read, July 2018. Exactly when Megan had taken a solo trip upstate, claiming she needed some time for herself. He had been too busy with the company to question it. Gabriel had just turned 1. "Can I hold on to this photo for a few days?" "Sophia, I promise I'll give it back. I need to look into some things." The girl seemed reluctant but eventually agreed. "Are you going to find out the truth about Gabriel? Are you going to find him?" "I'm going to do everything in my power," Edward promised, and it was a promise that came from the depths of his soul. He wrote down the address where Sophia was temporarily living and promised to return soon. He said goodbye to the girl with a hug that lasted longer than he intended, as if hugging this child could somehow bring him closer to his missing son. On the way home, Edward called Anthony Fisher, a discreet private investigator who had worked for him on other occasions. They arranged to meet that afternoon. Edward's mansion on the Upper East Side seemed even emptier than usual when he arrived. Every room echoed with memories of Gabriel. The boy's room remained untouched, exactly as it was on the day he disappeared. Toys scattered about, storybooks on the bed, drawings taped to the wall. He went up to his office and began to rummage through old files on Megan. His ex-wife had moved to Washington, D.C. shortly after their separation, taking only a few clothes and leaving behind everything that connected them. She had remarried Frank Rivers, a real estate developer with questionable political connections. Edward had never liked the man, but at the time, he was more concerned with keeping Gabriel with him. The joint custody arrangement had been a legal battlefield. Megan wanted to take the boy to D.C. Edward insisted on keeping him in New York. In the end, they reached an agreement. Gabriel would stay with his father during the week and spend alternate weekends with his mother, but Megan rarely stuck. Down to the deal, always citing professional commitments or trips with her new husband. Edward remembered how Gabriel used to be when he returned from those rare visits with his mother, quieter, more thoughtful. Once, the boy had asked if it was possible to have a family that nobody knew existed. Edward had thought it was just a child's imagination, the kind of talk from a kid who watched too many cartoons. Now that question carried a terrifying weight. When Anthony arrived, it was mid-afternoon. The investigator was a man in his early 50s, thin, with eyes that seemed to see beyond the obvious. He and Edward had a relationship of trust built over years of working together. "Anthony, I need you to investigate everything about a woman named Julia Carter. She worked for my ex-wife between 2016 and 2018. I also need everything on a girl named Sophia Carter, currently in the temporary care of a Miss Marlene. And most importantly, I need to know everything, absolutely everything, about Frank Rivers and his business activities over the last 5 years." Anthony took meticulous notes. "Do you suspect a connection to Gabriel's disappearance?" Edward handed the photo to the investigator. "I suspect much more than that. I think my son discovered a family secret that someone didn't want revealed, and I think that secret is related to a child who might be my daughter." The investigator studied the photo carefully. "I'll start immediately. I'll need to access hospital records, certificates, financial histories. It could take a few weeks." "You have 1 week," Edward said firmly. "Something tells me time is running out." After Anthony left, Edward returned to Gabriel's room. He sat on the floor leaning against the bed and hugged a teddy bear his son had loved. He closed his eyes and tried to remember every conversation, every detail from the last days before the disappearance. Gabriel had been excited that week. He said he'd made a new friend at the park, a really nice girl who needed help. He had always been an empathetic child, sensitive to the feelings of others. He also said he had discovered something important about the family, but it was a surprise. He wanted to tell him everything at dinner on Friday, but on Thursday, during an unscheduled visit, Megan took Gabriel to spend the day with her. She said she had something important to discuss with her son. When Edward questioned her, she was evasive, irritated. It was the last time he saw Gabriel. On Friday morning, Gabriel wasn't at school. Megan wasn't answering her phone. Frank was also unreachable. Edward called the police, who initially treated the case as a messy joint custody issue. But when Megan showed up alone, disoriented, saying Gabriel had disappeared during a trip to a mall in D.C., everything changed. The security cameras showed Gabriel entering the mall with his mother, but there was no footage of him leaving. It was as if he had simply vanished, into thin air. The police investigated, searched, questioned. Nothing. No leads, no trail, no explanation. Megan returned to D.C. after a few weeks, devastated according to her. Edward never spoke to her directly again. All communication went through their lawyers. She would send occasional messages asking for updates, but always in a cold, distant manner, as if she had already given up on finding her own son. Now, holding the drawing Sophia had given him, Edward began to question everything. What if Gabriel's disappearance wasn't an accident? What if it was related to the secret the boy had discovered? And what if Megan knew something she had never revealed? The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his lawyer, Richard Lopez. "Edward, I just received a strange notification. Someone is requesting access to the birth records of all biological children related to your ex-wife over the last 10 years. The order came from a family court in D.C. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Who made the request?" "It's not clear. The request is sealed. But I thought you should know. Does this have anything to do with Gabriel?" "It might have everything to do with it," Edward replied. "Richard, I need you to use all your contacts to find out who's behind this request and what they're looking for. It's urgent." After hanging up, Edward went back to his office and opened a safe built into the wall. Inside was a box with Gabriel's belongings that the police had returned after the initial investigation. Clothes, toys, a small backpack. He had never had the courage to look through it all carefully. Now, methodically, He began to examine each item. In the backpack he found drawing pads, colored pencils, an old spoiled sandwich. At the bottom, in an inner pocket he almost missed, his fingers touched something stiff. It was another drawing, folded several times. With trembling hands, Edward unfolded the paper. It was a sequence of drawings, like a child's comic strip. In the first panel, a boy found a girl crying. In the second, they played together. In the third, the boy saw the girl with a woman he seemed to recognize. In the fourth and final panel, the boy had drawn 3 figures holding hands with a large heart around them and had written, "New Family." Edward rested his head on the desk and finally let the tears fall. His son had discovered he had a sister. He had tried to protect her, to include her in the family, and maybe, just maybe, someone had stopped that truth from coming out. That night, Edward made a decision. He wouldn't wait for the formal investigation. He would go after the truth himself. He called the pilot of his private jet. "Get the plane ready. We're flying to DC early tomorrow morning." Before going to sleep, Edward returned to Prospect Park. It was already dark, but he knew the way. He sat on the bench, looked at the lake where the ducks were now sleeping, and made a silent promise. "Gabriel, wherever you are, I'm going to find out the truth. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to protect Sophia, just like you wanted me to. I won't give up, ever." The full moon illuminated the park with a silvery, melancholic light. The cold night wind made the leaves on the trees dance like restless shadows. Edward closed his eyes, and for an instant could have sworn he heard his son's laughter echoing through the trees. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe it was hope, that stubborn force that refuses to die even when all seems lost. Edward stood up, straightened his shoulders, and walked back to the car with steps more determined than he had taken in months. The search for the truth was just beginning. And this time he wouldn't stop until he found all the answers, no matter how painful they might be. Because a father never gives up on his son. And now, apparently, he had not one, but 2 children to protect. The city lights twinkled in the distance as Edward drove home, carrying with him not just the memories of the past, but a renewed determination to build a future where all the hidden truths would finally come to light. And somewhere he knew Gabriel was waiting to be found, waiting for his family, at last, to be complete. The flight to DC was just over an hour, but for Edward, every minute felt like an eternity. He hadn't been able to sleep, mentally replaying every conversation with Gabriel in the days leading up to his disappearance, searching for clues he might have missed at the time. Every word from his son now carried a new meaning, a new weight. The nation's capital was waking up under a strong sun typical of the region. From above, the city's planned layout looked like a giant airplane landed in the countryside, its symmetrical wings stretching out. Edward had always found DC a strange city, too artificial, lacking the chaotic organic feel of New York. But this was where Megan had chosen to start her new life, and perhaps this was where the answers he sought were waiting. A rental car was waiting for him at the airport. Edward drove to his hotel, checked in quickly, and went straight to the address he had for Megan and Frank, a luxury gated community in Georgetown, one of the city's most exclusive areas, with enormous houses protected by high walls and sophisticated security systems. He parked across the street, watching the house for a few minutes. It was a modern structure of glass and concrete, with impeccably manicured gardens, a symbol of success and opulence. But Edward knew the difference between looking good and being good. And that house, as beautiful as it was, emanated a coldness that gave him chills. He rang the gate's buzzer. A woman's voice answered over the intercom. "Who is it?" "Edward Miller. I need to speak with Megan." There was a tense silence on the other end. Then the voice returned, quieter, almost a whisper. "She doesn't want to talk to you. Tell her it's about Gabriel and about Sophia." Another silence, this one longer. Edward could hear muffled voices arguing on the other side. Finally, the gate slowly swung open. A middle-aged housekeeper led him to the living room. The inside of the house was as cold as the outside. Overly modern furniture with no personality, as if it had come straight from a design magazine. No family photos on the walls, no forgotten toys in a corner, no sign that a child had ever set foot there. Megan descended the stairs with measured steps. At 38, she still possessed the beauty that had captivated Edward 2 decades ago, but something was different. Her eyes, once bright and expressive, now seemed dull, as if they had seen things no one should ever see. She wore expensive clothes, but was thinner than Edward remembered. Much thinner. "Edward," she said his name as if pronouncing a foreign word. "I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk, Megan, it's important." She hesitated, then gestured for him to sit. She remained standing, keeping her distance. "If this is about resuming the search for Gabriel, I've already told the police and the lawyers that it's about Sophia." Megan's reaction was instantaneous. Her hands began to tremble. Her face, already pale, turned even whiter. She leaned on the back of an armchair for support. "How did you find out?" Her voice was barely audible. "Gabriel knew, didn't he?" Edward stood up, approaching her carefully, as if dealing with something very fragile about to break. "He found out he had a sister, a girl named Sophia that you had and hid from everyone, from me, from him, from the whole world." Megan closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her face. "You don't understand. You can't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain why you hid a daughter. Explain why Gabriel disappeared right after discovering this secret." "I didn't do anything to Gabriel," Megan practically screamed, her voice breaking. "I would never hurt my son. I loved that boy more than anything." "Loved?" Edward's heart clenched at her use of the past tense. "Have you given up on him, Megan? Do you know something you haven't told me?" She collapsed into the armchair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Edward sat across from her, waiting. He knew he had to give her time to process, to find the words. Finally, Megan looked up. Her eyes were red, but there was a new determination in them, as if she had made a decision she had been putting off for a long time. "Sophia isn't your daughter," she began, her voice hoarse. "I got pregnant during our marriage, but with another man, an affair that lasted a few months. I was confused, unhappy, feeling like my life was slipping through my fingers. You worked so much, Edward. I felt so alone." Edward swallowed hard. It hurt to hear, but he needed the whole truth. "Go on." "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. Gabriel had just turned 1. You were at the peak of your career, building your business empire. If I told you, I would lose everything. Custody of Gabriel, financial stability, my reputation. So I hid it. I wore loose clothes, made up health problems, went upstate when my belly started to show." "And Julia," Edward asked, "your assistant, did she know?" Megan nodded slowly. "Julia was the only person I trusted. She helped me through the pregnancy, stayed with me during the birth. When Sophia was born, we paid Julia to register her as her own daughter. We gave her a generous sum, enough for her to raise the girl comfortably, far from New York, far from you." Edward felt sick. "You gave away your own daughter, as if she were an object you could just pass on to someone else." "I had no choice," Megan defended herself, but her voice was filled with guilt. "Julia was a good person. She desperately wanted to be a mother but couldn't have children. It was an arrangement that benefited everyone. Sophia would have a loving family, Julia would fulfill her dream, and I could keep my life intact." "But it didn't work out, did it?" Edward pressed. "Julia got sick. She got very sick and ended up leaving Sophia all alone in the world." Megan covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears again. "When I heard Julia had passed, I tried to find Sophia, but her biological father, the man Julia married later, had taken her. I searched, hired people, but he just vanished with the girl. Years later, I found out he had abandoned her." "And you did nothing," Edward said, each word heavy with accusation and disappointment. "Your own daughter bounced from one home to another, and you did nothing." "I couldn't," Megan stood up abruptly. "You don't understand. If I publicly claimed Sophia, everything would come out. The affair, the lie, everything. Frank didn't know anything. He wouldn't have been able to handle it. And Gabriel, God, Gabriel couldn't know." But he found out, Edward said softly. I don't know how, but he did. He met Sophia in the park. They became friends. And when Gabriel put the pieces together, when he realized that abandoned little girl was his sister, he wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to bring her into the family. Megan sat down again, looking completely drained. Gabriel was always so pure, so good. He had a heart too big for this cruel world. What happened that day, Megan? Edward leaned forward. The day Gabriel disappeared. You need to tell me everything, every single detail. She took several deep breaths before she began. Gabriel called me on Thursday, the day before he disappeared. He said he needed to talk to me urgently about something very important. He was agitated, excited. I picked him up in New York and brought him here. On the way, he told me everything. Edward's heart raced. What exactly did he say? That he had met a girl in the park, that they played together every day, that she told him about the mother who was gone, about the father who abandoned her. Gabriel is smart, Edward. Very smart for a 5-year-old. He asked questions and Sophia answered. She mentioned Julia's name. She mentioned details Gabriel recognized because he'd overheard our conversations in the past, things a child shouldn't have picked up on, but that stuck in his memory. And he concluded that Sophia was his sister. Yes, he was so happy, Edward. He said he'd always wanted a brother or sister. He said he was going to help me bring Sophia into our family, that you would love her, that we would finally be a complete family. He didn't understand the complexity of the situation. To him it was simple, he found. A sister and sisters belong together. Edward had to fight back tears. He could perfectly imagine Gabriel saying those things with that childish enthusiasm, that purity of heart. And then I panicked, Megan admitted, her voice breaking. I told Gabriel he was confused, that it couldn't be true, but he insisted. He even had a drawing he made of her and him together. He said he was going to show it to you, that you would understand, that you would go get Sophia and bring her home. But you couldn't let that happen. It wasn't just about me, Megan defended herself desperately. Frank, he wouldn't understand. He has business, Edward. Sensitive, important business. He needs to maintain a flawless image. A scandal like this could ruin everything. A cold anger rose in Edward's chest. Are you telling me your husband's public image and business were more important than your own son? That's not it. I was trying to protect everyone. Gabriel, Sophia, myself. I thought if I talked to Gabriel, if I explained calmly, he would understand that we needed to keep it a secret for now. But it didn't work. Megan shook her head. Tears now, falling freely. Gabriel got angry with me. For the first time in his life, my son was truly angry with me. He said I was being selfish, that Sophia was alone and needed a family. He said he was going to tell you everything anyway. Edward closed his eyes, picturing the scene. His little boy, defending a sister he barely knew, confronting his own mother for the sake of what was right. What did you do, Megan? I called Frank. I was desperate. He said he would handle it, that he would talk to Gabriel, explain things in a way a child could understand. He took Gabriel for a walk at the mall, said they would talk over some ice cream. And then Gabriel disappeared. Yes. The word came out almost as a moan. Frank came back alone, pale, saying he'd lost sight of Gabriel for just a minute, that when he looked again the boy was gone. We called security immediately, searched the whole mall, but it was as if he had just vanished. Edward stood up, needing to move, to process it all. Do you believe Frank's story? Megan hesitated. That hesitation told Edward everything he needed to know. You suspect your own husband, Edward stated, not as a question but as a fact. I don't know what to believe, Megan whispered. Frank changed after that day. He became distant, nervous. He started having secret meetings, taking phone calls away from me. I tried to question him, but he said it was just work, and I was so consumed by guilt, so desperate looking for Gabriel, that I couldn't push it. Where is Frank now? He's traveling. Said he had business in Miami, but Edward... She stood up and grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. If you suspect him, if you think he has something to do with Gabriel's disappearance, you need to be careful. Frank has connections, powerful people. If he finds out you're investigating—" Edward gently but firmly removed her hand. "I'm not afraid of him, Megan. All I want is to find my son, our son, and to protect Sophia, like Gabriel wanted." "Sophia," Megan repeated the name like a prayer. "Is she okay? Is she in a safe place?" "She's in temporary care, but she needs a real family. She needs to know the truth about who she is." Megan closed her eyes. "If you tell her I'm her biological mother, she'll hate me. I abandoned her, Edward. I turned my back on her when she needed me most." "Maybe," Edward agreed. "Or maybe she just needs to know she's not alone in the world, that she has a family, however imperfect it may be." Before leaving, Edward turned back to Megan. "I need the records from Frank's company, financial movements, contracts, everything. Can you get that for me?" Megan looked frightened. "He keeps everything locked in his office. He's extremely cautious with his business." "But you have access to the house. You can find a way." She bit her lip, clearly torn. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I can get it, but it will take a few days." "You have 48 hours, Edward said, already heading for the door. "After that, I'll use other means to get what I need. And Megan, if you're hiding anything else, if there's any detail you haven't told me, you'd better tell me now." "There is one thing," she said, as his hand was on the doorknob. "In the months before Gabriel disappeared, Frank was getting strange phone calls. Once I heard him arguing with someone about eliminating problems and protecting investments. At the time, I thought it was just business, but now—" Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Do you think Gabriel was the problem that needed to be eliminated?" "I don't want to believe that," Megan whispered. "But sometimes late at night I wake up and wonder, and that doubt is eating me up inside." Edward left Megan's house with more questions than answers. He returned to the hotel and immediately called Anthony, his investigator. "I need everything on Frank Rivers, not just the surface-level business. I want to know who he works with, who he works for, what his real interests are. And I need to know exactly where he was on the day Gabriel disappeared, minute by minute." "That's going to require some less conventional resources," Anthony warned. "Do whatever it takes. Money is no object." While waiting for the investigator to work, Edward decided to pursue another lead: Julia's sister, if she had one. Megan had mentioned Julia had family upstate. With a few phone calls and the use of his considerable resources, Edward managed to track down a woman named Helen Carter, Julia's older sister, who lived in a small town about 120 miles from New York City. He decided he would visit her as soon as he got back, but first there was something he needed to check in D.C., the mall where Gabriel had disappeared. The Capitol Galleria was one of the largest in the city, modern and always crowded. Edward arrived in the mid-afternoon and went straight to the management office. He showed his ID and explained that he was investigating his son's disappearance. The head of security, a man named Carlos, was helpful. "I remember the case well, Mr. Miller. It was a very strange situation. We reviewed all the cameras multiple times. I want to see the footage again, all of it." Carlos led him to the monitoring room. For the next 2 hours, Edward watched the images from that fateful day over and over. He saw Gabriel entering with Frank, the boy holding his stepfather's hand. But there was something about Gabriel's posture that caught his attention. The boy seemed reluctant, looking back several times, as if searching for someone or wanting to run away. They went to the food court. Frank bought ice cream for both of them. They sat at a table. Edward zoomed in as much as he could. He could see Frank talking, gesturing. Gabriel seemed to be arguing, shaking his head no. Then something happened. Frank got a call on his cell phone. He answered, and his expression changed completely. He became serious, nervous. He spoke quickly to Gabriel and stood up, still on the phone. Gabriel was left alone at the table, stirring his melting ice cream. "Stop there," Edward said. "Can you rewind a bit?" Carlos rewound the footage. Edward watched intently. Frank was a few feet away, his back to Gabriel, focused on the call. And then, almost imperceptibly, Gabriel got up from his chair and started walking away. "He left on his own," Edward murmured. "He wasn't taken, he ran." Carlos looked surprised. "But where to? He doesn't show up leaving the mall on any camera." Show me all the possible exits from that area. For the next hour, they systematically reviewed every camera near the food court. And then Edward saw it. A door marked Restricted Access, Employees Only. Gabriel had gone through it. Where does that door lead? Edward asked, his heart pounding. To the service corridors. There are several emergency exits that lead to the loading dock. But Mr. Miller, those doors are supposed to be locked. A child wouldn't be able to... Unless someone left them open on purpose, Edward finished. Someone who knew Gabriel was going to try to escape. Someone who was waiting for him. Carlos turned pale. Are you saying it was a planned kidnapping? I'm saying my son was taken by someone he might have known. Someone who convinced him to go willingly. I need the footage from the loading dock cameras for that time. But when they checked, they discovered that the cameras for that specific area had been under maintenance that day. How convenient. Edward left the mall certain that Gabriel's disappearance had been carefully orchestrated, but by whom? And more importantly, where had they taken his son? Back at the hotel, he found a message from Anthony. I found something important on Frank Rivers. We need to talk in person. I'll be there tomorrow morning. That night, Edward barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Gabriel, about Sophia, about all the lies that had been told, all the secrets that had been kept, a family destroyed by pride, fear, and selfishness. But there was something more he knew. There was a piece of the puzzle still missing, and he had a disturbing feeling that when he found that piece, the whole truth would be much darker than he imagined. At 3 in the morning, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello? Silence on the other end. But someone was there. He could hear soft breathing. Who is this? Edward insisted, a child's voice muffled as if whispering from a hidden place. Daddy? The world stopped. Edward felt as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. Gabriel, is that you? But the line was already dead. The call had been disconnected. With trembling hands, Edward tried to call back, but the number was out of service. He fell to his knees on the hotel room floor, the phone still pressed to his ear, tears streaming down his face. His son was alive, and he was trying to make contact. Now, more than ever, Edward knew he couldn't give up. Gabriel was out there somewhere, waiting to be found, and he would move heaven and earth, use every resource at his disposal, break every rule if necessary, but he would find his son. The DC night remained silent outside, but inside the hotel room, a father had just received the greatest gift he could hope for: hope. Hope that it wasn't too late. Hope that the story wasn't over. Hope that soon father and son would be reunited. The early morning found Edward still awake, sitting in the hotel room armchair, phone in hand, replaying that mysterious call over and over in his mind. The voice was muffled, perhaps distorted by a bad connection or something used to disguise it, but there was something in that daddy that resonated deep in a father's soul. Was it really Gabriel? Or was he so desperate that his mind was starting to play tricks on him? At 6 a.m., unable to wait any longer, Edward called Anthony. The investigator answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Edward, I was just about to call you. I found some things about Frank Rivers you need to know, urgently. I got a call last night, Edward interrupted. A child called me Daddy. The line went dead before I could say anything else. Anthony, what? If it's Gabriel? There was a pause on the other end. Did you manage to trace the number? It was disconnected when I tried to call back, like a burner phone. I'll get the call's origin traced through the carrier. But Edward, you need to prepare for the possibility that it's a trap. If the people involved in Gabriel's disappearance found out you're investigating, they might be trying to destabilize you. Edward squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the headache that was beginning to throb. Tell me what you found on Frank. It's better if we talk in person. I'm catching the first flight to DC. I'll meet you at your hotel in 3 hours. Those 3 hours were the longest of Edward's life. He took a hot shower, trying to organize his thoughts, ordered coffee to the room but could barely drink it. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each more agonizing than the last. When Anthony finally arrived, he brought a thick folder of documents and a laptop. The investigator looked like he hadn't slept either, his stubble and tired eyes evidence of intense work. Frank Rivers is not who he seems, Anthony began without preamble, opening his laptop. His real estate investment firm is just a front. He's involved in a complex money laundering scheme through fake real estate transactions. Edward wasn't surprised. He had always known Frank was untrustworthy. Go on. He buys properties at inflated prices using money from questionable sources, then resells them for much less, cleaning the capital in the process. But that's just the surface. The money he's laundering comes from very problematic sources. Corrupt politicians, businessmen involved in tax fraud, even some names linked to influence peddling in D.C. Edward's stomach turned. And Megan knows about this? Apparently not. At least not the full extent. But she's involved even if unknowingly. Frank used the access she had to your old company's systems to facilitate some transactions. She still had credentials from when she was married to you, remember? They were never fully deactivated. My God, Edward ran a hand through his hair. So he used her, made her an accomplice without her even knowing. Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting. Anthony turned the laptop to show a series of highlighted financial transactions. 2 weeks before Gabriel's disappearance, Frank received a substantial transfer from an offshore account. The amount? $1 million. Payment for what? That's the million-dollar question. But there's more. On the same day Gabriel disappeared, there was a cash withdrawal of $20,000 from Frank's personal account. Hard cash, untraceable. And there are records of several calls from him to a number I've traced to a small rural property in Virginia, about 120 miles from here. Edward's heart began to beat faster. You think Gabriel is there? I don't know, but I think it's worth investigating. The property is registered to a shell company, but I found out it was bought by Frank 3 years ago. It's an isolated place, perfect for keeping someone hidden. Edward stood up, renewed determination shining in his eyes. Then we're going there, now. Hold on. Anthony raised a hand. We can't just storm in. If Gabriel is really there, and if there are people watching, we could put him in danger. We need a plan. Edward knew the investigator was right, but every fiber of his being screamed to race to that place immediately. Then tell me the plan. Before Anthony could answer, Edward's phone rang. It was Megan. Edward, I got the files you asked for. Her voice was tense, nervous. Frank left early for a meeting, but he'll be back at noon. I need to meet you before then. Where? There's a quiet cafe in DuPont Circle. Central Cafe. I can be there in 20 minutes. Edward and Anthony arrived at the cafe before her. It was a simple place, frequented by government workers and students, perfect for a discreet meeting. Megan entered wearing dark sunglasses and a scarf covering part of her hair, as if afraid of being recognized. She sat down quickly, pulling a flash drive from her purse. It's all here, contracts, transactions, emails. Edward, I had no idea what Frank was doing. When I saw the files, I was terrified. Anthony took the flash drive and plugged it into his laptop, immediately starting to scan the files. His face grew more serious as he read. Megan, you need to get out of that house, he said without looking up from the screen. If Frank finds out you took this, you're in danger. I can't just leave, she protested. He'll get suspicious, and if he has something to do with Gabriel. If I run now. She's right, Edward intervened. Megan, you need to act normal. But I'm going to arrange for your protection. Discreet people who will keep an eye on you, make sure you're safe. There's something here, Anthony interrupted, turning the laptop. An email from Frank to someone identified only as R. The date is 3 days before Gabriel's disappearance. Read this. The email was short, but disturbing. The boy knows too much. The situation needs to be controlled before it compromises everything. You know what to do. I need a permanent solution, but one that won't raise suspicion. Megan covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with horror. No, he couldn't. Gabriel was just a child. Permanent solution, Edward repeated the words, feeling bile rise in his throat. But Gabriel wasn't. He's alive. I know he is. That call. Unless, Anthony said slowly. The permanent solution wasn't about hurting Gabriel, but about hiding him, keeping him isolated, away from everyone, where he couldn't tell what he knew. About Sophia, Edward finished. Gabriel knew about Sophia. He knew she was his sister, knew Megan had hidden a daughter. What if Frank was afraid that revelation would bring his whole criminal operation to light, that investigations would start, that people would start asking questions? He would make Gabriel disappear, Megan whispered, tears streaming from behind her sunglasses. To protect his business, his reputation, his empire built on lies and crime. My God, Edward, what have I done? I brought a monster into our lives. Edward wanted to comfort her, but part of him was still angry. Angry about the choices she had made, the secrets she had kept. We need to find out who this R is. That's who Frank sent Gabriel to. I'm already on it, Anthony typed rapidly. The email was sent from an encrypted server, but every server leaves a trail. I just need time. Time is what we don't have. Edward slammed his hand on the table in frustration. That property in Virginia, we're going there. Now. But before they could leave the cafe, Megan's phone rang. It was Frank. She looked at Edward, her eyes filled with panic. Answer it, he instructed. Act normal. With trembling hands, Megan answered. Hi, honey. Everything okay? Frank's voice on the other end was tense. Edward could hear it clearly. Where are you? I went out to do some shopping. Why? Come home. Now. We need to talk. Is everything all right? You sound nervous. Just come back, Megan. It's urgent. He hung up abruptly. Megan turned pale. He knows. Somehow he found out. Edward made a quick decision. Anthony, take Megan to a safe place. A hotel. Use a fake name. I'm going to the house. I'm going to confront Frank. That's insane, Anthony protested. If he's capable of making a child disappear, we don't know what else he's capable of. That's exactly why I have to go. I'm going to use the only power I have, my position, my money, my connections. I'm going to threaten him with total exposure if he doesn't tell me where Gabriel is. Men like Frank only understand one language, consequences. Megan grabbed Edward's arm. Be careful, please. I've already lost Gabriel. I can't lose you too. An hour later, Edward was back at the Georgetown community where Megan and Frank lived, but this time he didn't ring the bell. He used the code Megan had given him to open the service gate. He entered silently through the back door. The house was too quiet. Edward walked cautiously through the kitchen, the living room. Voices were coming from the office, on the second floor. He went up slowly, each step sounding like a thunderclap to his nervous ears. The office door was ajar. Edward could see Frank on the phone, gesturing nervously. I don't care about the difficulties, Frank was saying sharply. The situation has changed. The father is investigating. The mother is acting strange. We need to accelerate the plan. Yes, that means moving the boy sooner than we expected. Edward felt his blood boil. He couldn't hold back. He threw the door open, storming into the office like a hurricane. Where is my son? Frank spun around, his face turning ashen. He dropped the phone, which hit the floor with a clatter. For a moment, the two men stared at each other in silence. Edward, Frank finally said, trying to regain his composure, this is trespassing. I don't care. I heard your conversation. You know where Gabriel is. Tell me now, or I swear I will destroy everything you've built. Every business, every bank account, every connection you have. I will expose everything to the public, the police, the press. Frank gave a cold, calculating smile. You have no proof of anything. And even if you did, you think I care about empty threats? They're not empty. Edward pulled his phone from his pocket. I have copies of all your emails, fraudulent contracts, money laundering records right here. With one click, I can send it all to the proper authorities. You'll spend the next 20 years in prison. Frank's smile faltered. Megan, that bitch betrayed me. Don't talk about her like that. Edward took a step forward, his fists clenched. You used her, manipulated her, made her an accomplice to your crimes. And worse, you made my son disappear to protect your dirty secrets. Gabriel was becoming a problem, Frank said with a disturbing coldness, as if discussing a business deal. He found out about the bastard, about Megan's secrets. It was only a matter of time before he told you, and you started digging. And when you dig in one place, other things turn up. So you decided to get rid of a 5-year-old boy, an innocent child? I didn't get rid of him, Frank practically yelled, losing his composure. I just put him somewhere safe. away from the complications. He's well cared for, fed, even being tutored. Eventually, when all this blows over, when there's no more danger of exposure. You're insane, Edward interrupted, barely able to believe what he was hearing. You kidnapped my son. You're holding him prisoner somewhere, and you think that's acceptable. It was the only solution, Frank defended himself. You don't understand the magnitude of what's at stake. It's not just money. It's powerful people, Edward. Politicians, businessmen, people who don't accept failure. If my operation came to light because of some chatty kid— Where is he? Edward pronounced each word separately, his voice low and dangerous. Frank hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. Even if— I told you, you wouldn't get there in time. As soon as you leave, I'm making a call. Gabriel will be moved to another location, this time for good. A place you'll never find him. Edward felt desperation threatened to consume him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had learned over years in business that desperation was weakness. You're not going to do that, because if you do, you'll have nothing to negotiate with. And I guarantee, without a bargaining chip, your life ends today. You're not a killer, Edward. You don't have the guts. I don't have to be, Edward smiled humorlessly. But I have friends who are far more dangerous than you can imagine, and some of them owe me big favors. One word from me, and you simply disappear. Your businesses disappear. Your entire life disappears, exactly like you did to my son. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with tension. Frank swallowed hard, and for the first time, Edward could see something like fear in his eyes. There's a farm, Frank finally caved, in Virginia. About 3 hours from here, the boy is there with a woman I'm paying to look after him. He thinks he's there temporarily, that he's going home soon. The address now. Frank wrote the address on a piece of paper with trembling hands. Edward took it and turned to leave, but stopped at the door. You're staying here. You're not making any calls, not warning anyone. I have people watching this house. If you try anything, the evidence goes to the police immediately, and you'll be in jail before sunset. Understand? Frank just nodded, looking as if he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Edward ran out of the house, calling Anthony on his way. I've got the address. Get Megan and meet me on the highway. We're going to get Gabriel. The drive to the farm in Virginia was the longest of Edward's life, even as he sped down the highway. Anthony followed in another car with Megan. The sun was high in the sky when they finally reached the property. It was an isolated place, a simple house surrounded by pasture and a few trees. It looked too peaceful to be the setting for so much suffering. Edward parked and got out of the car, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. He walked to the front door and knocked. A middle-aged woman opened it, her face showing surprise, then fear. Who are you? I'm Edward Miller, Gabriel's father. I'm here to take him home. The woman turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Edward said firmly but without aggression. I know my son is here. I know you're being paid to keep him hidden. But that ends now. Let me see my son. The woman glanced over her shoulder, undecided. Mr. Rivers said no one could. Frank is about to be arrested, and if you don't cooperate, you're going down with him. But if you help me now, if you let me take my son home, I guarantee you won't have any trouble. You have my word. Tears began to stream down the woman's face. I needed the money. My family, we're struggling. But that boy, he cries every night for his father. I can't stand to see it anymore. He's upstairs in the back room. Edward took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart in his throat. He stopped in front of the indicated door and took a deep breath. His hands were shaking as he turned the knob. The room was simple but clean. There were toys scattered about, children's books, a small bed. And there, standing by the window, looking out with a sadness no child should ever know, was Gabriel. The boy turned as he heard the door open. His eyes went wide. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if they couldn't believe it was real. Then Gabriel ran. He ran with all the strength his little 5-year-old legs could muster, shouting a single word that contained all the love, all the pain, all the longing in, the world. Daddy! Edward dropped to his knees, opening his arms, and caught his son, hugging him so tightly he was afraid he might hurt him, but couldn't let go. Gabriel was crying, Edward was crying, and in that moment, nothing else in the world mattered. "I knew you'd find me," Gabriel sobbed against his father's chest. "I knew it. I tried to call last night, but Helen took the phone before I could say more." "It's okay now," Edward murmured, kissing the top of his son's head over and over. "It's okay, you're safe. I found you, Daddy." "Found you?" Megan appeared in the doorway, her hands covering her mouth. When Gabriel saw her, his face showed confusion, hurt, but also hope. "Mommy?" Megan dropped to her knees too, and Gabriel hesitated for only a moment before reaching an arm out to her as well, including her in the embrace. The three of them stayed there, a broken family trying to piece itself back together, crying tears of relief, of joy, of pain, and of hope. After a while, Gabriel pulled back a little, looking at his father with those big, serious eyes. "Daddy, what about Sophia, my sister? Did you find her? Do you know she's my real sister?" Edward smiled through his tears. "Yes, son, I know. And yes, I'm going to take care of her too. We're going to be a family, just like you wanted." The smile that lit up Gabriel's face was the most beautiful thing Edward had ever seen in his entire life. The journey back to New York was completely different from the desperate flight to D.C. Edward's private jet now carried not just a relieved father, but a family in the process of rebuilding. Gabriel slept leaning against his father's shoulder, emotionally exhausted after so many months of separation. Megan sat across the aisle, her eyes never leaving her son for more than a few seconds, as if she feared he might disappear again if she blinked. Anthony had stayed behind in Virginia to deal with the local authorities and ensure that the woman who had kept Gabriel, Helen, was treated with the promised leniency. She had cooperated fully, providing documents, recordings, and all correspondence with Frank. Her guilt was clear, but so were her desperate circumstances. Edward kept his word. She would not be prosecuted, but would receive help for her family through a foundation he maintained. During the flight, Gabriel woke up a few times, always searching for his father with his eyes, needing to be sure this wasn't a dream. In one of those moments, he asked the question that had been hammering in his mind since he arrived at that farm. "Daddy, why did Mommy let that man take me away?" Edward exchanged a meaningful look with Megan. They had talked about this while Gabriel slept, about how much of the truth a 5-year-old could and should know. They decided Gabriel deserved honesty, but in a way he could process. "Your stepfather," Edward began carefully, "did some very bad things. He was afraid that people would find out about those bad things, and he thought that if you were away for a while, it would be safer for him. But what he did was wrong, very wrong, and he's going to have to answer for it." "Is he going to jail?" Gabriel asked, and there was no malice in his voice, only childish curiosity. "Probably. People who do bad things need to learn that there are consequences." "And Sophia, when do I get to see my sister?" Megan, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Her voice was choked with emotion but firm. "Soon, my love. Your father has already arranged everything. Sophia is going to live with you. She's going to be part of our family, just like you always wanted." Gabriel smiled, that pure smile that lights up a parent's world. "I knew you'd understand, Daddy. I always knew." When they landed in New York, Edward had a difficult decision ahead. He called Richard, his lawyer, who was already preparing all the necessary paperwork, not only to prosecute Frank criminally, but also to begin the process of gaining custody of Sophia. "The evidence Anthony collected is solid," Richard explained over the phone. "Frank Rivers is going to face charges for kidnapping, false imprisonment, money laundering, fraud, and a list of other crimes. He's not getting out of this. As for Sophia, since Megan is the biological mother and you were married to her—" "We're not married anymore," Edward corrected him. "Right, but you can petition for guardianship as her legal guardian, especially considering Gabriel's express wish and the neglect Sophia has suffered. The judge will look at the best interest of the child. And considering your financial stability, reputation, and the fact that you and Gabriel clearly want Sophia in the family, I don't foresee any problems." But Edward wanted to do more than just get legal custody. He wanted to do it the right way. He wanted Sophia to choose. 2 days later, with Gabriel already readjusting to his routine at home, Edward went to pick up Sophia from Miss Marlene's house, the woman who was temporarily caring for her. The girl was in the small front yard, drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. When she saw Edward, she dropped the chalk and ran to him. "You came back, you said you would, and you did." Edward knelt down to her level. "And I brought someone who's been missing you like crazy." Gabriel appeared from behind the car where he had been hiding, and Sophia's shriek of joy echoed down the entire street. The two children ran to each other, hugging like old friends who had been separated for far too long. And in a way, that's exactly what they were. "I thought I'd never see you again," Sophia said, tears streaming freely. "I thought you were gone forever." "I would never leave you," Gabriel replied with the seriousness of someone making a sacred vow. "You're my sister. Siblings stick together." Edward watched the scene, his heart aching. These two children, whom life had tried to separate in every possible way, had found in each other something the adults around them had long since lost, the simplicity of a true connection. Later, sitting in the living room of Edward's mansion, with Gabriel enthusiastically showing Sophia his toys, Edward had the conversation he knew was necessary. "Sophia, I need to tell you something important. Do you remember your mommy?" The girl stopped playing, her face showing the sadness of someone who carries losses too great for one so small. "A little. She was pretty, and she loved me a lot." "Yes, she did, and she always wanted what was best for you. But there's something you don't know. The woman who took care of you, Julia, she wasn't your birth mother. You were adopted when you were a baby." Sophia processed this for a moment. "But she was my mom in my heart." "Yes, and she always will be. But your birth mother, she's still alive." Sophia's eyes widened. "She is," Edward gestured, to Megan, who had been waiting nervously at the door. She entered slowly, her hands trembling, her eyes full of tears. Sophia looked at her, then at Edward, then at Gabriel, trying to understand. "Is she—" "She's my mommy," Gabriel explained, taking Sophia's hand. "And she's your mommy too. We're real siblings, Soph, by blood." Megan knelt in front of Sophia but kept her distance, not wanting to force anything. "I know you don't know me, and I know I made terrible mistakes. I gave you to someone else to raise when you were born because I was scared and confused, but not a day went by that I didn't think of you. Not a single day." Sophia looked at Megan with those big, serious eyes. "Why didn't you come get me when Mommy Julia went away and I was all alone?" The question, asked with the brutal honesty of a child, cut Megan like a knife. "Because I'm a coward," she answered, and the raw honesty of her reply surprised even Edward. "I was afraid of what people would think, of what would happen to my life. I put my fears before you, and because of that, you lost a part of your childhood that I can never give back. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope one day I can show you that I've changed, that I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." Sophia was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at Gabriel, who gave her an encouraging smile, and then at Edward, who nodded gently. "Gabriel said you would help me," Sophia finally said to Edward. "He said you were the best dad in the world, and that you would make us stay together. Was that, true?" Edward felt his eyes sting. "I want you to stay here with us very much, Sophia. I want you and Gabriel to be raised together, as siblings, as a family. But only if you want to. The choice is yours." "Can I have my own room?" The question, so simple, so childish, so full of hope, made all the adults in the room smile through their tears. "You can have any room you want," Edward promised. "You can decorate it however you like. You can have all the toys you want. And most importantly, you'll have a brother who loves you and a father who will do anything to protect you. And a mother who will spend the rest of her life trying to make up for the mistakes she made," Megan added softly. Sophia looked at Gabriel again. "Can we share a room? I don't want to be alone." "Of course," Gabriel jumped up excitedly. "We'll be the best roommates in the world." And just like that, with the simplicity only children can muster to embrace new beginnings, Sophia made her choice. She chose family. She chose to stay. The following months were a time of adjustment, discovery, and healing. Edward hired a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma, to work with both Gabriel and Sophia. The boy had his difficult moments, nightmares where he relived the day he was taken, but he always woke up safe in his own bed, with his father by his side, ready to comfort him. Sophia, for her part, was flourishing. For the first time in her life, she had stability. She had her own room, which she decorated with clouds painted on the ceiling. She had new clothes, toys, but more importantly, she had people who loved her unconditionally. As for Megan, she proved true to her promise of change. She divorced Frank as soon as the criminal proceedings against him began. She moved back to New York, renting a modest apartment near Edward's house. She started therapy, worked on herself, on her selfishness, on her fears. And slowly, very slowly, she began to rebuild a relationship with Sophia. At first, it was just supervised visits once a week. Sophia was cautious, testing the boundaries, seeing if Megan would really stick around or abandon her again. But Megan always showed up, every week without fail, with patience and love. One day, 6 months after their reunion, Sophia called Megan Mom for the first time. It was during a walk in the same park where it had all begun. Megan cried right there, hugging the daughter she had lost and now found again. Frank Rivers was tried and found guilty of all charges. The sentence was hefty, 15 years in prison. His assets were seized to pay the victims of his fraud. His empire of lies crumbled completely. Edward attended the trial, but felt no satisfaction in Frank's downfall, only relief that that chapter was finally over. Family life found a new rhythm. On Sundays, Edward took the children to the park. Gabriel and Sophia would run among the trees, feed the ducks and laugh in that free way only children can. Sometimes Megan would join them, keeping a respectful distance, grateful to be a part of those moments. 1 year after Gabriel's disappearance, the family returned to Prospect Park for a private ceremony. It was Sophia's 6th birthday, and she had asked to celebrate it there, in the place where it all started. Sitting on Gabriel's favorite bench, Edward looked at his 2 children. Gabriel was teaching Sophia how to make a flower crown with daisies they had picked. The boy, now 6, had grown. He still carried the emotional scars of what he had been through, but he was stronger, more resilient. "Daddy," Gabriel called, showing off the finished crown. "Do you think it's pretty?" "It's perfect, son." "It's for you, Soph." Gabriel placed the crown on his sister's head. "Because today is your special day, and because you're a princess." Sophia laughed, that crystal-clear laugh Edward had learned to love as much as his sons. "I'm not a princess, I'm a warrior." "You can be both," Gabriel replied wisely. "Mom says the strongest women are the ones who know how to be both gentle and fierce." Edward glanced at Megan, who was watching the scene from a short distance. She had changed so much. The weight of guilt was still there. Probably always would be, but she had learned to carry it, to use it as motivation to be better, to do better. "Come on," Edward called, making room on the bench. "You're part of this family too." Megan hesitated for only a moment before joining them. Gabriel immediately snuggled up against her, and Sophia, after a moment, did the same on the other side. The 4 of them sat there in comfortable silence, watching the lake where the ducks glided gracefully. "You know," Edward began, "I used to come here when Gabriel was missing, and I felt completely lost. I thought I would never truly smile again, that I would never feel hope again, but look at us now." "We are a real family," Sophia said simply, and in those words lay all the truth in the world. "Yes, we are," Edward agreed, kissing the top of her head. "A family that's been through storms but learned how to dance. In the rain." "Daddy, that doesn't even make sense," Gabriel laughed. "Yes, it does," Megan defended, smiling. "It means that even when things get tough, we find reasons to keep going, to be happy, to be grateful." That evening, back at the mansion, Edward put the children to bed. They insisted on sleeping in the same room as they always did. Gabriel would tell Sophia made-up stories, and she would pretend to believe every absurd word. After they fell asleep, Edward stood in the doorway of their room watching. Gabriel had a protective arm over his sister even in his sleep. Sophia was clutching a teddy bear Gabriel had given her, telling her it was a magic bear that chased away all the nightmares. Richard, the lawyer, had called earlier with the latest news. "Sophia's adoption is finalized," Officially, she's your daughter now. And Edward? We did good. Those kids have a bright future ahead of them. A future. Something that had seemed so uncertain just a year ago now seemed full of infinite possibilities. Edward thought about everything they had been through. The pain of Gabriel's disappearance, the revelation about Sophia, Megan's secrets, Frank's betrayal, the desperate search, the emotional reunion, and finally, this moment of peace. Life had tested them all in unimaginable ways. It had broken, crushed, and challenged everything they believed to be true. But somehow, through the pain and chaos, they had found something precious, a second chance, a chance to be a real family, to love without reservation, to forgive the imperfect, to build something new on the ruins of what had been destroyed. Megan appeared beside him in the doorway. She had started coming over for dinner a few times a week now, part of the process of rebuilding trust. "They're so innocent," she whispered, "so pure. After everything they've been through, they can still smile like that." "Children have an incredible capacity for healing," Edward replied. "They teach us so much about resilience." "Edward," Megan looked at him with serious eyes, "I know I can never fully make up for everything I did wrong, but I want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful that you saved our son. Grateful that you took Sophia in. Grateful that you're giving me the chance to be a mother again, even though I don't deserve it. Everyone deserves a second chance," Edward said gently. "If the children can forgive, who are we to hold a grudge?" The months turned into years. Gabriel and Sophia grew up together, inseparable as only true siblings can be. They fought sometimes, like all kids do, but the love between them was unshakable. Gabriel became protective of Sophia in a way that was beyond his years. At school, he always stood up for her if anyone bothered her. Sophia, in turn, admired her older brother with complete adoration. Edward expanded his foundation to help children in situations similar to Sophia's. Children lost in the system, forgotten, abandoned. He used his fortune and influence to make a difference, to ensure that other children had the chance Sophia was given. Megan went back to work, but this time with a different purpose. She became a volunteer lawyer for adoption cases, helping other mothers who, like her, had made mistakes, but wanted to make peace with their past. On a late summer afternoon, 3 years after Gabriel's disappearance, the family was gathered in the backyard. Edward had installed a large swing, big enough for both children. They swung together, laughing as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Daddy," Gabriel called out, "do you remember when I told you I had a surprise? Before everything happened?" Edward remembered. It had been in the last days before the disappearance. "I remember. The surprise was Sophia. I wanted to tell you that I'd found my sister, that we were going to be a bigger, happier family. It took longer than I thought, but we did it, right?" Edward felt emotion tighten his throat. "Yes, son, we did it. And you know what the best part is?" Gabriel continued, his voice full of childish satisfaction. "Now I have a real sister, and she has a real family, and nobody's alone. Everybody has somebody." Sophia jumped off the swing and ran to Edward, hugging him with all the strength of her 8 years. "You're the best dad in the world." Gabriel was right. Megan, who was making lemonade in the kitchen, watched the scene through the window. There were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. She had lost so much time because of her fears and selfishness, but now she was determined to cherish every moment she was given. That night, after the children were asleep, Edward stood in his office looking out the window at the moonlit garden. He thought of all the choices he had made, all the difficult decisions, all the moments of despair. But he also thought of Gabriel laughing on the swing, of Sophia running through the yard, of Megan finally finding peace, of a family that had been broken but was now, somehow miraculously, stronger than ever. Life had not been kind to them. It had tested, tried, and nearly destroyed them. But they had survived. More than that, they had thrived. Edward picked up a recent photo of the children from his desk. Gabriel and Sophia holding hands, smiling at the camera. Behind them, in the blurred background, you could see Prospect Park, the place where it had all begun, and Edward realized something profound in that moment. Sometimes the worst experiences in life lead us to the most beautiful places. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. And sometimes the strongest families are the ones that have been broken and have chosen to rebuild themselves together. He placed the photo back on the desk and walked to the children's room. He stood in the doorway, as he did every night, watching Gabriel and Sophia sleep. Siblings, family, love. "Good night, my loves," he whispered into the dark room. "Daddy's here. I'll always be here." And as New York City slept outside, inside that house was a family that had learned the most important lesson of all, that true love isn't perfect, but it is persistent. That it's not about never falling, but about always getting back up. That it's not about avoiding pain, but about finding healing together. Gabriel and Sophia had a long life ahead of them. There would be challenges, certainly, difficult times, but they would have each other. They would have a family that fought for them. They would have a father who moved mountains to find them. They would have a mother who learned through error and redemption the true meaning of a mother's love. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The dawn would come soon, bringing a new day, and with it, new possibilities, new adventures, new stories to be written. But for now, on that quiet, peaceful night, a family slept safely, completely, and full of hope for the future that was yet to come. And somewhere, Gabriel and Sophia were dreaming of parks and swings, of laughter and hugs, of a future where they were together, always together, just as it should have been from the start. Because in the end, love always finds a way. It always finds a solution. And it always wins.